Oh, the broadcast is live. So, well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Highrise Symposium. I will explain you very briefly how it will work, how the round table is working. Well, it's a square table with 4 people here. First, I will have some introductory small talk, and then I will give the floor to first Professor Nadia Somek, who is professor at Mackenzie University and president of the Council of Architecture of Urbanism of Brazil. She's working on verticalization, and then to Professora Paula Barros, who is professor at the University Federal of Minas Gerais, and he's working on mental health and well-being. And you already had the pleasure of hearing her in a previous session of the panel of the symposium. And last, Professor Vinicius Neto, coordinator of the graduate program at the University Federal Fluminense, and also head of the Journal of Urban Morphology. And he's working on urbanity, and he just came back as visiting professor from Columbia University. So they will give a brief talk, and then we will begin to ask questions. I think I will look at the comments all the listener will make, and if they don't have questions, and I am sure they have a lot of questions, I will ask some of them. So I will now briefly share my screen and give some words of presentation. So I am going share screen, click home, paste presentation. Okay. So I think you are, I hope you are seeing my my presentation here. Yeah, thank you very much. So the roundtable, the title is Living the Vertical City After COVID-19, Anything New? And so the first question, or the first statements I might make, is that the pandemic we are living is an emergency, and emergencies often bring topics to the forefront that should have been addressed before. So the question, nothing new, is half answered by saying that, well, a lot of things which will be discussed today are not new, but have to be seen perhaps in another way, or have to be put into the forefront where they weren't just back. The pandemic is also a crisis, and so for each crisis, we want to know if they will bring systemic or paradigmatic changes or not. Because they might be temporary changes or cyclical changes, which are different from structural ones. So we have temporary solutions, but will they last? And also during each crisis, the death of the metropolis is predicted as, at the beginning of this crisis, we say, oh, it's the death of the vertical city because it's impossible during a pandemic to live in closed residential high rises. It's not the city, and so on and so on. But it's the case almost during each crisis. And also the need for radical change of settlement patterns is advised. And each time, in the past, the metropolis has reinforced itself. So would the pandemic change such trends? And as a side question, is the time of pandemic some sort of more rapid testing of ideas and change? Well, some companies succeeded in fabricating a vaccine in about 1 year instead of 10. So would it be the same in urbanism? But well, also we have to be very careful, because wave 1 of the pandemic was about metropolises mostly, and sparked a lot of comments on the unsustainability of such monstrous settlements. But the other waves, where we have wave 2, wave 3, and I hope we will not have wave 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, the other waves are going to the remotest parts of the countryside. So the debate is no more metropolises versus the rest of the nation, but how do we live in a vulnerable society wherever we are living? And also several, perhaps most, solutions adopted during the pandemic will certainly not be continued after it. So will it be a return to normalcy? Will it be creating a new word? Resilience is a word that is a lot used when there is a catastrophe, a crisis, can go to a pre-crisis situation, so what we might have called normalcy, but also it can go another way. And this is the third and last slide. We also have to take into account that urbanism and architecture have a very strong inertia. So cities did not disappear. People did not disappear, even if, unfortunately, a lot of them died, but it's not depopulation. So what is the possible adaptation of already existing infrastructure? We are not going to destroy all cities to build new ones. And also, sometimes the solutions that are proposed, or perhaps oftentimes, signal the revival of already known urban utopias, like garden cities, for instance. And so we have to also make differentiation between temporary measures and permanent shifts toward what would be a more sustainable cities. But the calls for more sustainable cities are also to be embedded in a more global way of thinking, in the climate change, for instance, also, which is another catastrophe with long-term effect. And the last question might be, what is the best scale to act? From global to local even to the home or the flat, the apartment itself. And indeed, I suppose that the answer would be we have to act at several scales and not the same way at each scale, but in a systemic way. Well, these are very randomly put questions that I want to ask, or it's not just questions, but also some statement. And I'm now stopping the screen, and I am asking Professor Somek to take the floor and to present her first reflections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. I will try to share the screen. I'm not very at ease with this kind of sharing. I tried once, said it was okay, but now I'm not. Mayara, como é que eu faço? Janela do aplicativo, compartilhar. Eu não estou achando minha. Vamos de novo. Mayara, você me ajuda? Share screen, depois share screen de novo. Eu não estou achando o meu desktop, minha área de trabalho. Eu estou achando meu e-mail. Oh.
Okay, sorry. Nadia, when you go to the bottom of the screen, there is share. You click on share. It will open another screen. Share screen again.
Eu sei, mas eu não consegui aqui. Agora eu saí de tudo. Eu não estou achando como voltar aqui.
Voltar?
Eu saí da projeção.
Okay, let's see.
Como é que eu volto aqui para a projeção? Não sei.
Não, a única forma que eu sei é clicando embaixo no share, quer dizer, eu não sei o que está acontecendo no teu monitor. Porque se a apresentação está aberta, na plataforma está funcionando. O que o Paulo, você viu que o Paulo escreveu no chat?
Não, porque eu saí, eu não estou achando.
Ele está dizendo o seguinte: a tua apresentação está aberta no PowerPoint, não está? Ué, tiraram a Nádia da tela?
Manuel, ela saiu.
Ela saiu.
Tem que aguardar ela retornar.
Okay.
Vamos passar para o Paula?
Okay. Put Christian back, please. I don't know what happened. She was having problems, and then and she left the transmission room. So I think until she comes back, she came now.
Yeah.
Okay. Nádia, a tua apresentação de PowerPoint está aberta? Tá. Agora, o que eles disseram foi de você diminuir a tela, reduzir o tamanho da tela do PowerPoint e quer dizer, fechar a tela do PowerPoint, abrir o PowerPoint e a partir daí compartilhar, fechar e abrir, e aí a gente fazer a operação de novo. De entrar no share. Agora, porque quando estava aberta, eles poderiam controlar por lá. Vocês não podem. Eu não sei o que a Mayara fez. Normalmente eles controlavam. Paulo, vocês não estão controlando a apresentação?
Pronto.
Nós estamos controlando aqui, ela não está compartilhando a tela de acordo.
Ok.
Já achei.
Fechou?
Estão vendo?
Agora sim.
Pronto. Já está aqui. Estão vendo? Alô? Estão me ouvindo?
Sim, professora, pode começar a apresentação, tudo certo.
So, I'm really sorry to not being a very good manager with this kind of new technology, but we already here. So, the question asked for Professor Christian are very, very difficult to answer, but my contribution will be around the studies I've been doing for the last 40 years. So the question I have done for myself, is now we are living a profound form of exclusion of poor people in Sao Paulo city and in the whole world. But with the case of Sao Paulo, we can explain how this exclusion and this diffusion of the city what have been built along the 20th century, and some data that explain how the exclusion process has increased above the structural exclusion process of our society. We have a structural exclusion process, but the urban regulation reinforce with excluding poor families, poor people from the vertical growth, we increase the exclusion process. That's why I will highlight sometimes and some regulation that increase this process. So I will present the panorama of Sao Paulo verticalization process that is expressed by FAR, FAR, cutting, and the spread of the city. Sao Paulo, it's a paradox. Sao Paulo is vertical but not dense. Despite being a vertical city, São Paulo is not densely populated due to this kind of urban regulation that has benefited mostly landowners and financial economic frames. Urban regulation and transportation infrastructure hasn't contributed to establish a compact city, what we call nowadays a compact city. The car and the buses that are the main transportation kind in Sao Paulo city has spread the city and haven't built a compact city that we are trying with the new master plan trying to build. These are the stages of verticalization process, but I want to highlight some times. 2004, it's as you see this curve, you see the high-rise building in residential use in Sao Paulo is increasing until 2004, when the high prices of cutting FAR make that the developers exploded to the metropolitan area.
Excuse me, we are only seeing...
expanded to metropolitan area. In the first period, we have the origins of the verticalization process, and the tramway built a compact city. When you have a tramway as a main transportation way, you have a dense mass transportation and a build of closer buildings and also a compact city. These are the whole buildings that was built in the period. From 40 to 57, we have a very interesting development of the vertical growth in Sao Paulo, because we had the possibility of building very close building in the central area to poor families. And we have a compact city before 56 and 57, and we have a very American style development of the offices building, and also the kitchenette that sheltered poor families. And also in Ayamelo, one of the urbanists of that time.
Excuse me, Nadia, we don't see the slides. We see only the first one, vertical growth in Sao Paulo, diffusion and exclusion, and we don't see the other ones. So
I am changing.
Oh, here, yes.
So
here we see.
You miss everything I said already.
No. We heard very well and we understood very well, but we didn't see the images.
This
Thank
one.
you very much.
Have you seen this one?
No. We only saw the first, that one.
That and this?
No.
Have you seen it now?
Yeah. Now, yes, we see it.
So I will repeat. Okay. So Sao Paulo is vertical but not dense. These are the periods. Are you seeing now?
Yeah, very well.
See, this is the curve that I was saying that 2004 has expanded for the metropolitan cities, the verticalization process. In the second period, from 20 to 40, we have, no, this is the first period. We have a tramway building the compact city. We have many buildings in the central area, mostly for offices and less for residential use. So from 40 to 57, we have, this is American style of building offices but in smaller scale than the United States. And we have free FER. We have vertical buildings, predominantly residential, in central neighborhoods, sheltering poor families. I would like to highlight this kind of production, and for rental small apartments to poor families. This was something that was eliminated in 57 because we have an elitization of the urban regulation with the law 5261, 50,000 to 61, that elitizated the apartments, built big apartments, and rental buildings in central area ended to be produced. So we have a reduce of FER for residential buildings, 6 for offices buildings, and we have a spread of the vertical growth linked to the industry of automobile that was settled in 56. So from 57 and on until 67, we have a spread of the vertical growth due to this minimum code of 35 square meters that increase the size of the apartment that were produced at that time. So we had an urban expansion, and we had this spread linked to the plan, avenues plan, Plano de Avenidas from Prestes Maia, and also this complementation with the reducing of FER. In 67, we have from 72, when the first zoning comprehensive law was settled, we have a boom of building new high-rise building for middle classes. And the bank, the Housing National Bank, previously established especially for low-income classes, turned to middle classes housing provision. So this is another wave of elitization of the high rise. So we had 57, 67, and 72 with the zoning law that reduced the possibility of small enterprising of building buildings of kitchenettes and also little apartments for middle classes for rental. So we miss this kind of production. So the 72 zoning law established new limitation to the FER, and we had the FER 2 for mostly 65% of the whole city of Sao Paulo. So we had, again, a new spreading of vertical growth and a vertical growth not attending to poor people, poor low-income families. So the vertical growth in Sao Paulo, and understand for Brazilian cities, are turned to middle classes and high-income classes. With the end of the National Bank of Housing, new ways of credit and financing turned mostly to high-income apartments. So we had another, with the end of BNH, we had another wave of elitization of the high-rise process, creation of new centrality, and the expansion for metropolitan surrounding. The city plan in 2002 and 2004 recognized the informal city without a real housing policy. So the FAR was cut again, and we have what we call the outorga onerosa do direito de construir. We were selling the right of building. So the process of Sao Paulo expanded to the metropolitan region. We didn't have a really qualified architecture design of high-rise building. We had a historical lack of public investment in transplantation that has resulted and reinforced the spread of the city and the vertical city. And is it possible to reverse this process? This is the divided city that we have been building for the last year, a very congested city with many, many cars and big buildings that not provide what we need. And what we can say about our reflection of the post-coronavirus timing that we are living now, that the big centralities are empty now. What we can do for this? So what the Professor Manuel and also Christian are asking are an exercise of impossible futurology. But we can make some reflection after the COVID-19. An inclusive compact city can be built from now on. This is a question. I'm going to make other questions, not trying to respond to the trickiest question of Professor Christian about the inertia, about the utopias. Yes, I would like to dream a little bit, but the scale is also a very important issue to address. So can we make an inclusionary zoning, as we already seen now that the zoning is exclusionary? Can we reverse this? The master plan of 2014 is trying to make the quota of solidarity. It's a kind of inclusionary zoning with 10% of big developments that can give some 10% for building social housing. But it's not, I have a student making a research on this, but the results are not very impressive. We can say that. We are seeing that we will have mini Detroits in the centralities that are empty. And can we make rehabilitation, even though with less added values uses? What will be, it's another question, what will be the new function of corporate space office? I think there will be a very important decrease of the new corporate building in our tertiary centrality. How can we settle a real housing policy with different financing for poor families? The Minha Casa Minha Vida is only giving the financing, or mostly giving the financing of middle classes that want to buy apartments for rental. Occupations of central buildings that we are seeing now, there are 55 buildings that are being occupied by poor families, organized by movement, social movement, with citizen and solidarity. but also the law of the Constitution of '88 that established that empty plots and empty buildings have to turn to the social function of the city. And we are not seeing this kind of instrument being applied in our reality. This fragment, urban project can be a solution with social inclusion. There are many critics about urban projects around the world and only turn it to financial interest and capitalistic competition. This fragmentation of urban regulation, trying to connect the poor with the rich and the middle classes in the city, is it possible? Building public spaces in urban projects also are very fragmented in our public policy. So for ending, I don't know if what time I've been using, but the pandemic has dramatically showed the need to assess density with quality. And we haven't seen this in the history of high-rise building and the vertical growth of the city. Compact city and the population health must be focused in a new concept of inclusionary sustainability and with possible concrete action aimed to the most vulnerable population. I think when the Christian talk about utopia, I want to be dreaming that shift, a very huge shift can be established in our life now. From now on, we are changing daily life, and maybe we can change. I think it's a dream, but we can dream here. We can change also urban regulation to have more sustainable and equitable cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have still more questions now to ask. And indeed, you said, are we dreaming? But well, you and I, we are also in a position in which we might have a very slight influence. You more the president of the IAU of Brazil, the other colleagues as a professor at universities who are teaching people just to shape the future. So it depends also, even if it's in a broad globalization process and political and so on, indeed. But we also have our small stone or big stone to put into the edification of the future. So I think that, well, our dreams might be perhaps the reality of tomorrow if it's good. Well, I give the floor to Professor Paula Barros now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Good morning, Nadia, Vinicius. Thank you very much as well to Manuel for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today. What I think that I may be able to contribute with this discussion, thinking a little about health and living high-rise buildings. And to talk, and of course, when I mention health, I'm including the COVID-19. But before I raise some issues, I think it's important to say what I define by health. And I think that the World Health Organization is a well-known definition that I will base the discussion as well. So for the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So I think about health being in a high-rise residential buildings during, for example, the lockdowns. It's a unique experience, and I think that if you take into account that the numbers of high-rise buildings are increasing, not only in Brazil, but in the world as a whole, I would like to invite you to think about living in these spaces during the pandemic and what we can learn from this experience. And when I talk about what you can learn, I will be talking as an architect and a town planner. So inside an apartment, during, for example, a lockdown, the only way to do physical exercises is with is indoors, is there is no other way. About the social well-being, I think, again, is important to define that it's the appraisal of one's circumstance in functioning in society. And finally, good mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So being in apartments during the pandemic to enhance the social well-being, the only way of doing this would be talking to people through mobile phones and so on. It would be a way to keep the connection. The internet as well, the technology has helped. But it's important to say that it has helped, but it's not the same of being with other people. So I suppose that because of this, the terraces in high-rise buildings became a popular spaces during the lockdowns in several cities around the world, because there people would be able to see each other. And it would be better sometimes than talking to other people through the internet, through the mobile phone, and so on. About the good mental health, what I would like I would like to stress is that social well-being, good mental health, social well-being, mental well-being, and physical well-being, they are interconnected. So one influences each other. And the focus, talking about mental well-being, we can associate it with a sense of relaxation, with a sense of welcoming, of belonging, and so on. And what I would like to stress is that there are some theories and also some studies that talk about the importance of some qualities in the built environment that can make us feel more relaxed with our energy. Our energy can be recharged only by looking aesthetically pleasing environment. It can change our mood. So the built environment, by looking, we can enhance our mental well-being. So again, thinking about the numbers of high-rise buildings are increasing. The pandemic gave us the opportunity to be indoors, inside this architectural typology for weeks. I think almost everybody a lot of people in Brazil and around the world had this experience. So I don't have the answers about what's going to happen after COVID, but I'd like what I think is that the pandemic has showed the importance of the aesthetic experience. In other words, the aesthetic experience in these regards matters to public health. I will be more specific. When I talk about the aesthetic experience, I will exclude the sense of physical well-being that is important for our health. But we can have an aesthetic experience or a pleasant experience by talking to other people, by going to an urban square and seeing other people. This evoke it can evoke positive emotional reactions, as well as some physical and spatial configurations. So, and in addition, several studies actually have mentioned the importance of nature to enhance our sense of mental well-being, including socialization. So the presence of trees, the possibility of seeing the skies, all of this is important for our mental health. And again, it's connected with the social well-being and the physical well-being. So if I have to summarize my issue if I have to summarize a question to be discussed later, I think that maybe the question would be, what's the role, what's the importance, or is aesthetic experience, does it really matters to public health? And therefore, the design of buildings, the design not only of buildings, but the urban design of cities, we may start to consider that it should be not treated as an option, an aspect that can be appreciated only by some classes. I think that the pandemic may invite us to think that the aesthetic experience is important to all, for people from all classes. So the quality of the design of buildings, of the streetscapes, are extremely important to enhance our mental well-being. It can also facilitate the socialization between people, which is also extremely important for our health. And finally, in a pleasant environment, again, several empirical studies have shown that the physical activities tend to increase in spaces that are featured with, that are aesthetically pleasing. And not only this, there are, of course, other attributes that are very important, like connectivity and so on. But the aesthetic quality is one attribute that also facilitates, motivates people to practice physical activities. And finally, so if it seems that aesthetic experience is important, another dimension that seems to matter to people now and possibly after the COVID is the green elements, the green infrastructure in the city. So yes, I think these would be the issues that I'd like to share with you to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for adding a new level with nature and aesthetics. And now I give the floor to Professor Vinicius Neto for a last small presentation. And then we will go on the global discussion. So,
right. So many thanks to all of you, Professor Christian, Paula, Nadia, and of course Manuel. I'm gonna. I have something like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, about 10 minutes. If it is 11, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to be here and talk to you. I think I'll be rather brief, and I'll bring a number of reflections here to share with you. Of course, we are dealing pretty much in the realm of inferences and informed guesses, if you will. We're trying to discuss what's life going to be like and look like once the pandemic is over. What are the changes which we will experience? Of course, this right now, this seems like a bit of a long shot for us over here in Brazil, because we're not at the end of this process. We are rather at the very middle of it. We are dealing with the toughest numbers in terms of daily cases, daily deaths, and so on. As the world is aware, we are of course deeply worried about all this. We are approaching numbers closer to the United States, which has a much larger population, around 55% larger than Brazil, and we are approaching the same numbers, around 4,000 deaths a day. So of course that's absolutely concerning, and so in some senses, important senses, it's difficult for us right now to think about life after the pandemic, once we are so caught in the middle of it. So I just wanted to make that first remark. But as urbanists and architects and planners and and urban thinkers, if you will, we also have our own need and our own requirements to think about cities and the future of cities, and try to anticipate trends and risks and potential solutions and so on and so forth. So let me bring you a bit of my own background in terms of research on the vertical city. Okay, I come from two sort of research fronts there. The first one, for the last 10 years, I've been dealing with the what you call the social effects of architecture. Essentially, it's about the impacts of different types of architecture on the public use of streets, the numbers of pedestrians in the streets, pedestrian movement, pedestrians standing, talking, interacting in public spaces. We're also looking into the effects of different kinds of buildings or types of buildings on microeconomic diversity, on the possibility of finding small businesses around you, retail activities like shops, and things that give you support on your daily life. Like when you leave your apartment and you go to the street, you're looking for certain facilities, certain activities, things that can make your life easier, like buying your supplies, food, and so on and so forth. So we have a sort of long scale research in 3 Brazilian capitals: Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre in the south, and Florianopolis in the south, which is a smaller city, around 500,000 people. Porto Alegre is about 1.5 million people. Rio, of course, much bigger, around 6 million people, 6.5 or so. So we essentially draw observations in hundreds of streets, and observed and collected information about thousands of buildings, vertical buildings, compact buildings, traditional typologies, modernist typologies as well, with more like it's kind of a more vertical configurations, if you will. And we draw correlations between the distributions of these different types of buildings and the presence of people in the streets as pedestrians. We drew correlations between the distribution of buildings and the distribution of local businesses, like retail activities and so on. And we managed to find negative correlations between vertical buildings and pedestrian movement, pedestrians interacting in public spaces, and the presence of retail activities, services, the local diversity in microeconomic activities, if you will. So we found in these 3 Brazilian cities, looking into hundreds of streets, we managed to find statistically significant negative correlations between vertical architecture and the diversity of microeconomic life and the presence of pedestrians in streets. Okay, so pretty much confirming Jane Jacobs' older insights and hypotheses. Of course, she never carried large-scale empirical studies. She carried ethnographic, if you will, observations. But our large-scale observations offer support for those older sort of classic thoughts that she brought to the discipline and changed the whole thing, changed the whole way of that we look at cities for the last 50 years. So so that's one thing. We look into for the effects and impacts of vertical architecture, which in Brazil, in these 3 cities, of course, we cannot say that for Brazil as a whole or every city in Brazil. We have more than 5,000 cities and over 20 large metropolitan regions. But for the 3 of them, results are very consistent. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing we looked into is, which we're doing right now. We have a sort of a research on segregation and on different forms of segregation. One of these forms is residential segregation, which is the classic form of segregation since the Chicago school, right, like 100 years ago. So we're looking into that, but looking into a kind of residential segregation, which we call vertical segregation. Actually, a number of people are looking into vertical segregation right now across the world. The main reference, I would say, is Maloutas, a Greek researcher who's working with us now. And he of course, he drew observations for Athens and other cities in Europe. And we're doing so in Brazil right now, looking into patterns of vertical segregations, both in formal residential areas, like the ones that the real estate market and its mechanisms produce, right? Like vertical architecture. And we're looking into vertical segregation in those middle and upper classes areas. We are right now developing a survey in Rio, in which we expect to collect data about income and the heights, like the floor where people live. Our hypothesis here is which is pretty sort of pretty intuitive and very common in Brazil, usual in Brazil, is to think that the richer you are, the more likely you are to live on the top floors of buildings. So we're collecting information for 30 different neighborhoods in Rio for, again, thousands of buildings. It's a survey which we are developing right now. We are also looking into patterns of vertical segregation in favelas. In the first case, for middle and upper, for vertical segregation in buildings, in the formal urbanized areas by the real estate market, we can get information carrying on online surveys. Okay, that's what we're doing. For favelas, we are going to try that, but it might be a bit harder because of the digital divide. All right, like in favelas, of course, we have lower income populations, which potentially means harder access to the internet in the way that would allow you to answer a survey. All right, you need a computer for that. It's difficult to do that on a mobile phone. Okay, so we are using census data, income data from the census, like over 10 years ago now. That's the last available data. And we have already results for Rio de Janeiro, which are very exciting. These are preliminary results, but we managed to find negative correlations between, again, statistically significant, for over 30 favelas in Rio, vertical favelas, of course, which grow over hills, all right, hills and mountains in Rio. Rio's topography, Rio's geography is well known around the world. It's an extraordinary geographical region, and of course with large hills and mountains, and poorer people, because of locational needs, historically urbanized parts of these hills and mountains, which are possible to urbanize, of course. And we managed to look into a number of those, as I mentioned, and we found that poorer people, even among the poor, I mean, we are already looking into a poor population, all right? But the poorer groups among them are likely to live on higher positions, locations in favelas, in vertical favelas. This is also kind of an intuitive thing to think about, because we are discussing here locational advantages in poor areas, and of course it's better for you to live closer to streets and so on than up there on top of hills. Okay, so that's what we're finding right now. I'm afraid I don't have much time left, but I would like to discuss the idea of vertical cities in the pandemic very briefly. Professor Christian, you can please interrupt me at any time and tell me that my time is up. Okay, so feel free to do that. In terms of vertical cities in the pandemics, the discussion of possible adaptations, considering this panorama. Of course, there's a long history of relations between cities and epidemics and pandemics for many centuries. We can recall the 19th century epidemics of cholera in London, for instance. The prejudices against the city, theories about the bad air of cities and so on. We also know that the 1919 influenza pandemic shaped cities, shaped patterns of urbanization in terms of vertical architecture associated with rarefied patterns of urbanization, like we see in Brasilia, Barra da Tijuca in Rio, Hansa Viertel in Berlin, and so on. So the whole world is familiar with this impact in terms of urbanization patterns. We seem to forget those impacts. We stopped fearing urban densities, which is good, right? And since the 1990s, we've been looking into the importance of densities, the positive effects of compacity for sustainability and so on. So luckily, we will not forget these positive impacts of compacity, densities, buildings which are adjacent to each other, as we see in Paris and in traditional centers of cities in Brazil, even in Brazil, all right? But during the pandemic, we could see in New York, for instance, a high number of people left Manhattan in April, March last year, all right? So there's a long debate about this, about the future. A lot of guesses, a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of futurology. But a few trends can be sort of seen there, which might be useful to discuss. The new centrality of homes transformed into workplaces. But of course, for not too many people, I would say. How many people can benefit from working from home? Informational workers, people working in administrative jobs. So not everyone. I would say that the majority of workers, even in advanced economies like the US or Europe are not going to work from home. Certainly not the case in Brazil. Okay, but this will have implications, even if a small part of the workforce keep working from home. This will have implications for urban patterns. Okay, also for homes, which will need more rooms, specialized areas within homes, for instance. Local areas around homes, around houses, will be more central in people's lives. People will spend more lives in their more time in their neighborhoods. This might have implications for the quality of the urban experience, as Paula was discussing, health, physical experience of spaces. This might lead or may lead to higher segregation, higher residential segregation in enclaved areas, gated communities, and so on. Of course, in terms of the economy, businesses, firms may compact their activities because smaller number of workers in physical settings means reducing the need for space. This can already be seen. This change can become a long-term one, all right? Which will, of course, have huge effects on urban patterns of concentration in central businesses districts, for instance, all right? So this change might be here to stay. I don't think urban centers will die, but they might get a bit smaller. A fourth change there: less works working at central business districts and other workplaces mean less commuting. So this will have implications for traffic, emissions, consumption of natural resources, urban performance, sustainability, also in the long term, which is, of course, welcome, all right? Even a small reduction in the workforce, working at home, a small reduction in commuting may bring positive effects. Fifth, a large part of the workforce will still commute, okay? So urban centers are likely to stay alive and well for the foreseeable future. Sixth, the economy will still be driven by interactions, the bodily-based interactions, even advanced activities in the informational economy still require face-to-face interactions. They might get less intense in terms of numbers, but they are still required because of the creativity, the effects of serendipity in interactions. You need unpredictable interactions and conversations between people to get anywhere in terms of new ideas. And ideas and innovations, of course, move the information economy. All right, so my best bet will be that, and we're talking about bet here and informed guesses, densities will still matter, compacity will still matter, vertical architecture might be reinforced, especially for the workers in the informational sectors, okay? So we might deal with some dispersion, some more complex urban patterns, and isolated architecture, perhaps vertical architecture, will have possibly a part to play, particularly with informational workers in residentially more affluent areas. Okay, that's my panorama here for you guys. I hope you found that useful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. You already answered quite a lot of questions about the pandemic, and I might have a question for all of you because, well, every one of you made some guesses on what was important, what might be arriving, and what questions still need to be answered. But I have one, but because to change things, well, I think that Vinicius, you mostly said that the current trends will just be marginally or a little more than marginally be changed, but the global trends will still be there. But I think that if we want to change things after the pandemics, to take into account mental health, to take into account aesthetics, to take into account other questions, we will have to build, there will have a consensus to be built to change things. And also, we will have to choose, well, in the consensus, who will lead the transition to some sort of new urban world. Because when we look at the end of the 19th century, the creation of what is called today urbanism, since about 1 century, a little more than 1 century, where there were architects saying, we are the ones, there were hygienists who were saying, we are the ones, were social reformers who said, we are the ones. And since about 50 years, the citizens also are saying, well, we also want, not only experts, but we also want to have a say into the future city. So my question to all of you would be, who might be leading, because now hygienists and the physician professors, epidemiologists and so on are talking and really talking a lot on what should be done, what should be not done, lockdown, not lockdown, inside, outside, who has to be, or more air into rooms and so on. So do you think that the current hierarchy between expertise, the experts of the city, might change to be, I forgot, engineers? People also say that they can do the future city as they did before. So this is the first question I would like to ask, because there were no questions. I'm not taking the floor because there are a lot of questions into the comments section. We are still waiting for them. So,
may I answer? I'll try to answer.
Yeah,
Thank you all for your exposition. It was very important and very rich for me. But I will try to answer Christian's question, because it will explain also why I am now leading the Council of Architects of Urbanism. I think in Brazil, 1/3 of the city are in bad and precarious conditions. So I think, as you said, the important role of the architects along the history of the city's urbanization try to show us that we'll have a important role now in Brazilian cities. So it's a kind of hope that I've been trying to believe that the Council of Architects, I think, who will lead? It's a very complex question that you are asking. But I think the architects and the Council of Architects has a role that we are proposing now for the 3 years that will be in the management of the Council of Architects. As 1/3 of the city and 1/3 of the population of Brazilian city live in bad condition, I think we have a tool since 2008. It's a law that we call Law Assessoria Técnica for Social Housing. It's technical assessment to assistance to local, to housing, to social housing. So we want to make partnerships with the municipalities and the social movements to improve the life with this instrument. I think it's not a vertical building issue, but I think it's a new role, a social role that we are introducing in the council that until now is very bureaucratic, not turn to transformation of the city and understanding that the architects are turned and can be responsible for the health of the cities. I think it's a hope that we are trying to set in the council and the new administration that we are starting now. It's a hope. As I said before, it's a dream, but we are very, very engaged with this kind of proposition.
Thank you. Vinicius and Paula, would you like to? Talk? Vinicius? Okay.
I think Paula could go first. Paula, please. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, of course, this concern about how I mean, what's the role of, you know, architecture planning, our field of practice, thinking about changes for the better. How can we somehow shape these income trends, which we are still trying to figure out, trying to anticipate? And of course, we need a close we need means of closely observing what's going on, collecting data, like, you know, to see how these changes are unfolding right now. But supposing or assuming that at least some of these trends we mentioned will, you know, are real and are out there and will get stronger or more consolidated in the future. How can planning reduce, for instance, trends of increasing residential segregation? Or planning can, you know, reduce the role of vertical architecture, assuming that vertical architecture have negative impacts on its surroundings in the public use of streets and so on, as I mentioned earlier. Also in relation to segregated areas and communities, because these things walk hand in hand. I think that's a very tough question, because these trends also are bottom-up trends. I mean, people are making decisions, people are reading, everyone, like from different income levels, and especially if you have the means and money to make locational decisions, right, and choose your location. That means that trends are patterns emerging from individual decisions, which are motivated by individual readings of the situation, and how the market itself takes advantage of that and sells those ideas, emergent ideas, back to people in terms of cliches, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of propaganda, and you have the idea there. Of course, it's very difficult to counter bottom-up trends, trends emerging from individual decisions which gather momentum and affect each other and influence large-scale decisions and change. I'm afraid I don't have an answer here. I think we have to follow these trends. We have to think about planning. I think about planning, all right, because planning can also shape rules for architecture and architectural decisions for how they design buildings, right? So I think planning is the central thing here, and we need to be aware of these potential trends of increasing segregation, okay, residential segregation, vertical segregation, and perhaps draw measures, draw planning instruments to prevent the intensification of those trends, all right? Say by stimulating mixed residential areas in intra-urban locations, bringing more limits to heights in vertical buildings, or the possibility of building higher in locations farther from urban centers. Okay, and we of course have to keep paying attention to density and compacity. These are my guesses. These are my views.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. I think that Nadia and Vinicius mentioned very important points regarding who may lead the change, from where this change will come. And I agree with them. I only would like to say that talking about the micro-scale interventions, bottom-up interventions, as Vinicius mentioned, they can have large-scale effects. At the same time, that top-down are also highly important. So, what I would like to raise is that both should complement each other if changes are to be real. I think that bottom up and top down together, planning by itself, as well micro-scale interventions or researchers, we cannot do much if we are not, we need to create, I think, that a kind of network in the same direction. And it's very hard to find this platform because there are different views, different perspectives, different interests, but to make a real change on behalf of everybody, I think that all these agents should meet, should act in the same direction. Yes. Thank you.
If you allowed me, I have a question for the two exposers, Christian.
Yeah, indeed.
I think Paula said a very important thing, how to link the micro scale that she brought us and the large scale that I and Vinicius brought too. So I have a question for both. How your research can be useful for the formulations of urban policies, of urban regulation. I think the scale that Paula brought us it's very important to understand. But one thing was in my mind when she was exposing the quality of design and the public square, the green elements that she is pointing out as important for people. I was thinking how you can do this in favelas, in the poor settlements. How can you improve this kind of rules and important things that you say? I think a hug is very important to well-being too, but people in favelas and the poor settlements are so close, so dense, and how can you improve the things that you listed for us? And also for Vinicius, how the compact cities can be built with quality. What we saw in Sao Paulo master plan, the last one, is trying to improve compact city in some access of public transportation and density in this access. But we are not in we cannot see in this regulation the building of a construction of urban spaces of quality. So how can your research, both of you, can be linked, as Paula said before, can be linked to the formulation of public and urban policies? also for Christian, I don't know what you're working in, I don't know what your research, but if you want to answer. How can improve scale, as you asked before? How can we have a scale of intervention, and how can we act in larger scale? Because we need a large intervention and scale of intervention. And what we see that the small scale is being improved, and not large interventions as we need.
Well, I leave the floor. So who wants to answer first, Vinicius or Paula? Paula.
Thank you. It's a really difficult question, Nadia, and I don't have the answer. What I'm sure is that we need new ways of thinking, planning, and designing cities. We need new perspectives. So when you talk about the importance of making large-scale changes to enhance the quality of life of people who, for example, live in the favelas, in the shanty towns, I definitely don't have the answer, but I can share with you a research that you have just submitted. Let's see if you get the funding. And we will be working with children in high-rise vertical, not high-rise, I think they would be in high buildings that were built in shanty towns. So you want to develop a research with not a large number of children. It's a qualitative study, so it's explorative and transdisciplinary study. So you have people from education, from arts, from public health, engineering, and we will try to do is to include, to create a small group of children and work with them. They will be part of the research in all phases, since the data generation until the analysis of data. And in the end, they will validate our analysis, the analysis made by the researchers. So why are you doing this? Firstly, because we understand that they understanding their living environment much better than us. So they have to be heard, and they have a lot to say. So we will try. I think that the challenge would be to create instruments, mainly now that we have thought in developing we are prepared to develop the research to gather data using mobile phone, internet, and so on. But trying to be more objective. What we are trying to do is to produce data, so talk about the importance of research that Vinicius mentioned, but produce data with children. But when you talk produce with them, we really want them to be with us throughout the research. And also to provoke change. In the end, we are going to have a panel again of people from public sector, people who have the power to define the regulations, to analyze the results. So what we are trying to do is trying to bring everybody together to discuss an issue that is really important. What's the issue? Is how the design of high-rise buildings may contribute to the well-being of children. And just a small observation is why children? Why not work with other people? And the children until 12 years old, they are their environment are extremely important to their well-being, and the experiences that we have when you are a child shape us our adult life. So it's a key moment in life, and they have the right to express their opinions. And finally, imagine a children until 12 years old living in an apartment. It's for this social group is one of the people who live in apartments that most suffer with this type of house. So to conclude, Nadia, my answer to your question would be, we need new ways of thinking and doing, and maybe a way to developing these new conceptions, perspectives. One possibility as a researcher is starting with explorative, small-scale research, and after that, and trying to include several agents. Is it? Don't know, Vinicius have more ideas, other ideas? Christian?
Okay, I will just say that your point about the micro scale, macro scale, and especially the one about convergent bottom-up trends and top-down measures, that was quite good. I think, yeah, I agree. We have to think all of this together. Excuse me. As for Nadia's question, that was a very tough, nearly cruel question, and I'm joking, but it is indeed a tough question, and of course a very important one, which we need to keep in mind. Nadia, you're absolutely right in bringing this to us, because especially as we deal with a kind of research and science which are concerned with the well-being of people and better environments, right? So what my research can do in that sense, I think my research may lead to improvements in the formulation of policies, right? Like showing the impacts of vertical architecture, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, this can inform planning, especially if you have a sort of a strong public sphere of discussions, bringing together the expertise of academics and the work of institutional work of planners. If you have to bring those spheres together in a stronger public sphere, you have to have debate there, and of course you have to have the larger sense of the public sphere, which is people actually getting to know these ideas and getting to know these works and these debates, so we can have a kind of an more informed decisions about all this process here. So in a way, this you mentioned Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo, the recent changes to urban planning and the master plan over there, of course, were, in my view, were positive and somehow reflect this kind of trend, which my own research is a part of. In Porto Alegre, in South Brazil, which was a city, a kind of a political reference in the 90s due to participatory politics over here. In Porto Alegre, there is a debate right now in terms of the master plan, which includes ideas of reducing the distance between buildings, creating more compact neighborhoods, and so on. And even firms in the market, in the real estate market, are more interested in those ideas. That's a local thing, perhaps because I'm originally from here and my ideas somehow, and my colleagues work with me over here. So we managed to have more, influence in a way, more contacts or whatever is going on over here. I'm surprised myself. About research to counter segregation, Before that, favelas. Favelas work well. Favelas are social and microeconomic machines. They are good for urban performance overall. But of course, we must improve quality in infrastructures, water supply, sewage systems, and so on and so forth, right? In terms of using research to counter segregation, well, once research shows segregation patterns and current trends, which we're discussing earlier, research can support and justify decisions in planning, and also stimulus to the market, all right? I think we have to stop seeing the market as the enemy. We have to start informing intelligent agents and agencies in the market and inform them about our findings. And for instance, draw more policies around mixed-use buildings, the advantages of compact architecture for businesses, for the microeconomy, and for the information economy. Many people in the information economy, people in, for instance, in the massive firms like Google, they are very aware of about the importance of being in dense traditional neighborhoods. They are in Manhattan. They are right. They are placing strategic hubs for their own workers in very dense, compact neighborhoods. So so they can see that. We just have to improve our channels of communication between all these agencies, all right? So we can see that happening in New York, in Berlin, in Sao Paulo, but we do have to work on our communication. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been two questions in the comments section. The first, so you have here, what is your opinion, to Nadia, about the Direito de Protocolo? Is it a real right, or is it a problem for new ideas to the city? Well, I'll let you answer.
It's a very good question. And as Vinicius just said, the enterprises and the developers and the market, it's not our enemy. We have to know how use in the best form. We live in capitalistic cities, so we cannot close our eyes to how process can be set on. So the protocol, I haven't looked very well. Maybe you can explain more what kind of issue you want to explain. I think it's Lucas who asked the question. I think we have to deal and have partnership. And as a president of the Council of Architecture, I want to make a partnership with whoever want to improve life of the population of Brazil. I have a commitment to Brazilian society, and I ask the question of how to link research and urban planning action, because I traveled. I have been traveling and assuming management, urban management in the municipality of Sao Paulo, and also I am a researcher in a long term. So I make the link. I personally make the link of the research and the urban planning. And I think, one lesson I've learned is what Vinicius just said, that we can have the Direito de Protocolo. We have to analyze the project beyond this, and we have to understand who are winning, who are losing with this kind of new instrument. But I think it's if is very understand, if he's very analyze how it will work, I think it's potentially a good instrument to make partnership between the needs of building a compact city with quality and an urban project that the Direito de Protocolo can improve.
Vinicius and Paula, do you want to add something? No?
No.
No. Okay, so there is another question by the same Lucas. What is the place of historic heritage in the concept of compact city? Well, this goes also on the fact that the city is already there, and some parts of the city are also protected. Heritage is protected. So how do we do with this part of the city we cannot really change? We have to deal with also the infrastructure. We cannot get rid of the subways. We cannot get rid of motorways. Well, we can, but it's very expensive and very politically sensitive, and so on and so on. So,
thank you, Lucas, for this question. It's very dear for me, this kind of issue, because I was the former director of heritage of Sao Paulo city. So it's an issue that I've been working also. As a student, I was a stagiary in the historic department heritage. And so I think we have it's wrong to say, Christian, I'm sorry to say, but the heritage can be changed with the progress of the city. I think it's a wrong idea, mostly for Sao Paulo, that is a new city. Maybe in France, it's more rigid, the view of heritage protection. But in Sao Paulo, you have new urban ensembles to protect and protected. And Sao Paulo has 4,000 buildings protected by heritage law, but they are not monuments. And so they can be a very good value to mix memory and contemporary intervention. I think it's a very important thing that we can mix heritage and also contemporary intervention. Mostly, and I defend this, that the zoning law that was built in Frankfurt in 1875, so the 19th century, it's a very extemporary instrument. I think the zoning law that Sao Paulo is so valued, so cherished, I am against. I think it's not a good element because it's linked only to the lot, doesn't build public spaces, and it's a very out of time. It's very ultrapassado, out of timing. It's an extemporary instrument. I think we have to deal with urban projects, comprehensive and inclusive urban projects that can link what Paula said and Vinicius said, that in urban projects we can protect heritage, we can have mini-scale action, and we can build compact city with quality. So I am a defensor of urban projects, and I think also the heritage can be restored and protected with the financing that can come to make also diversity of housing, social housing, and also financing the quality of public spaces and build city, as my friend French said, construire la ville, building cities, and not also have what we have in Sao Paulo, only corporate urban planning, a corporate urbanism. In Jardim das Perdizes, I don't know if you know Sao Paulo, It's a big area that since 72 was frozen to build sometime a new centrality, a metropolitan centrality, and was given to the developers that make a very, very uniconic and very ordinary gated community of high-rise building. So we don't have the culture of urban renovation, urban planning like the ZAC that we have in France, and we don't, the urban operation also that we had from the 90s. It's a tool called urban operation, only for finance the public spaces turn to the car road. Only for car, the public spaces are not built with the urban operation. So thank you, Lucas, for this very, very important question, because heritage is my heart is turned to.
Okay. Paula and Vinicius, do you want to add?
I only have a sort of a short remark, not exactly about heritage, but something connected with the compact city. And I think we have to, actually I should have said this at the very beginning. I think we have to qualify what we mean by verticalization, because we do have different forms of verticalization. You can imagine verticalization in a place like Manhattan, which, despite being one of the most vertical, areas in the world, you still manage to have compact blocks, urban blocks there, and which, I mean, it is a quite different scenario from verticalization in Dubai or in Sao Paulo or in Porto Alegre, if you will. So you can manage to have vertical architecture, or what I mean by increasing the height and the number of floor of buildings, if you pay attention to how buildings are positioned in their plots and lots and blocks. For instance, in Copacabana, you have in Rio, like a really well-known area, we have 12 floors buildings in a very compact area, very walkable, very lively, extremely lively, and microeconomically diverse, brilliant area. I live there, so I'm not there right now, but I live there. So we do have to qualify different forms of verticalization, right? The key thing here for me is the distance between buildings. If you begin to increase distance between buildings, you are likely to stimulate a decrease in walkability, in the ability of people to walk between places. You are going to increase distances overall, which is likely to have bad effects for urban performance, stimulate traffic, car dependence, and so on. So I just wanted to qualify what I mean by verticalization. Here we have to, I suggest we have to keep that in mind. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Paula, do you want to? No. So we have two more questions not by Lucas this time, but by Mayra. It's about temporary intervention. So what do you think about the temporary interventions worldwide during the pandemic period? And can we have the further question, which is linked to and how can we use temporary intervention as an instrument to enhance quality of life, not only regarding consumption and economy, as it happened here in Sao Paulo? So it's about temporariness versus as also something which might be introduced in the normal way of planning in between things. So who wants to begin?
I have a question. Is there contemporary intervention post-pandemic? I haven't noticed. I don't know what Mayara means for it, but I think it's important to to clarify that we are not intervention. What we are virtual intervention in post-pandemic. We haven't until now pandemic post-intervention. I haven't understand the meaning of the question.
While Maíra might try to clarify this issue or over a new comment, while she does that, if she will, I could bring a couple of ideas here. If Maíra means by interventions, temporary interventions, like any kind of intervention, not only in terms of space, urban space, architecture, and so on, I think as societies, especially Western societies, failed like miserably in terms of interventions, in terms of how to counter the whole pandemic thing. We failed in terms of protocols, in terms of coordination, cooperation between countries, within countries. I think it's we have forgotten what, as a society, the whole world went through like 100 years ago, in a world where around 1.8 billion people, as far as my memory informed here, in a world like with less than 2 billion people, we managed to have 500 million people infected, according to estimates, and 50 million people died from influenza 100 years ago. We forgot that experience, and we didn't have any proper protocols, and I think we allowed this pandemic to spread and be a global disaster in terms of health, people's lives, and so on. So I think we have a lot of work to do, a lot of homework to do to get this right and prevent a next pandemic. In terms of architecture, in terms of cities now, Maíra, you mean there interventions regarding the use of public places like restaurants and so on and so forth? Well, as I said, I think we were very slow in implementing any preventions. I think this happened on a global scale, and it only evolved in a bad way up to the micro scale, and especially in a place like Brazil, where the whole thing is a mess, and there is no coordination between scales of policies whatsoever. There is no federal policy, but don't get me started on that. I just think it's sort of a global failure in terms of health protocols. I apologize if I'm being a bit, radical here, but that's my view on this issue.
I can make a reflection about Maíra question. I think the perplexity is invading public management, and what we can say that we are making some kind of movements that wanting to turn back to the normal life, normal that won't exist anymore. So the normal life won't exist, and people in the public sector are trying to move on and continuing to make rules and plans without thinking. That's why the researchers are so important. Without thinking the things that Vinicius told us that as a trend will stay, that the city maybe won't die, but there will be a spread of people living and working in beautiful places and green spaces that Paula think that is the well-being of life. But I can give an example, as I told you about the mini Detroits of the urban central business district center. They are the big buildings of that was built in the urban operation are being turning to be rented to contemporary startups and micro enterprises. So it's a market response to the emptiness of the big buildings that were built the last decade in Sao Paulo city. As Vinicius said, and I agree, won't be built in the same velocity and the same size that was settled in the past. So I think it's these big buildings, empty, are being replaced, the big corporation for micro firms, micro enterprise. Maybe we can mix, if the law don't forbid us, is mixed with the residential. Maybe this is a dream that I have exposed in my last slide. Why cannot rehabilitate these big buildings to mixed use and to mix micro enterprise and housing? It's a new way, as Paula said, that we have to think new ways, and beyond the perplexity, we have to move on and thinking new ways of doing public and urban regulations.
I'd like to say some words. Take into account what Nadia has just said about the need of thinking new ways, of the need of new ways of thinking and the planning and the designing cities, and coming back to what's the importance of temporary interventions nowadays. Of course, today, the reality today differs in cities as far as the COVID is concerned, but as Vinicius mentioned as well, we are in the middle. So I think it's not still time to discuss. It's a process. It's a very, it's an uncertain process. We don't know what's going to happen. And so when the time comes, so when in accordance with the health authorities, it's a right time to do temporary interventions, I think they can be a useful tool to several purposes. So, for example, and an important tool to explore new ways of thinking, planning, and designing cities. An example, as a pedagogical tool or as a pedagogical strategy, temporary interventions in public open spaces, for example, can help students to develop skills necessary to co-design with children, for example. On the other hand, temporary interventions can also be read as a bottom-up tactic that can enhance liveliness, inclusiveness, the multisensory aspects of places, the plurality of the urban open spaces again. So I think that as a tool, we can use it in different ways, in really insightful and helpful ways to think this new city that's so needed, a more equal, democratic, inclusive, sustainable, and so on. And when I mentioned, for example, about it seems to, from my point of view, coming back to the pandemic, the need, several cities like Belo Horizonte, today, in fact, all important squares in the city have been fenced. People cannot get in the squares. The city is in lockdown. And it's interesting to think why these public spaces had to be fenced. And one hypothesis, one possibility, is because, as I mentioned before, the aesthetic quality of these places, and when I talk about aesthetic, it's not only about nature, it's not only about people, it's not only about visual qualities, it's everything together. And it seems that when people go there, enjoy themselves, seeing other people, talking to other people, observing manifestations, performances, enjoying the weather, all of this, accordance with several studies, it's very important to our health as a whole. And again, just to connect with the importance of temporary interventions, the importance of data, to guide the policies, to guide the legislation. I want to stress that the aesthetic quality of the built environment, that is what architects and the town planners are supposed to, we were prepared to develop physical interventions that are, again, aesthetic pleasing to people. But on the other hand, when you look in the research, for example, it's not too common see people discussing complexity, human scale, facade articulation, how to translate this to public policies. So it's easier to discuss aspects that are more tangible, more measurable. And what I'd like to say is that we need, from my point of view, it seems that we need to find a way of studying a more systematic way these intangible and highly important aspects of the built environment. So they are not a detail. As I told in the beginning, I think they are important to public health, the quality of the aesthetic quality of the built environment.
Thank you. I have another question, because there are no more questions. Do you think that the pandemic will bring more individualism in major cities? Because when we are talking about smart city, digital meeting and so on, or even restructuring the apartments to create specific rooms to do this and that, will it and also people are taking less public transport because it might be dangerous, and more the individual car or even the bike. Well, they are biking, cycling in the cities. Do you think, and also that they might want to live in pleasant environments when they are quite rich, into more gated communities? Do you think we are going towards, and even if people are less commuting to mingle with others, using teleworking, it's also more individual working and living than mingling with others and social interactions. So do you think we are heading that way? Well, we were already heading that way since a long time, but do you think this will be enhanced? And how might we reverse by creating other places where people might just interact, or better places for people to interact, to attract them outside their homes, or outside their car, outside, if we can say so, their bike and so on? Who will begin?
Another exercise of futurology.
Yeah, indeed.
As you said, a long time ago, the social relationship of the late capitalism, is leading to individualism. So it's not a novelty. What we have now, it's isolation with the virtual connection. So I never been so connected with so many people for so many countries since the last year. So I've been connected. I discussed with 156 women a platform for changing the council. The last year we've been discussing a long time, and we're still discussing how to change the things in the Council of Architecture and Urbanism. So I think we are isolated. We are individualistic because the relationship of the late capitalism is leading for this. But I think the virtual connection also can give us a perspective of changes with the whole world. We have the Congress of Architects UIA 2020 that was delayed for 2021. We were expecting, and I was a counselor of a UIA before being counselor of Brazilian Council. We were expecting 15,000 architects in Rio last July. Now we have connected 35,000 architects in the whole world. So I think we have to face the good thing that the connectivity can give us. We are isolated, but we are connected. And I think solidarity, I don't know if I'm too much optimistic. I don't think the times give us too much hope and optimism, but I want to be optimistic. I think the connection with so many people can improve solidarity between people and build citizenship also not in the street, not in the square, not in the public spaces, but in our office. I'm in my office, and I'm connected with friends, with Paula in Minas Gerais. I don't know, Vinicius in Porto Alegre. I don't know where he's. I thought he was in New York, but it's very good to be connected this way.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add. It's well, and Vinicius already talked about that. It's a digital divide. So we are connected because we are at the top of the hierarchy. So we have computers, we have connections, we have friends who have computers and connections, and so on and so on. So, but I don't. You have also to have policies to bridge the digital divide if you want to change the society like that. So, well, in my university, for instance, there was a huge survey. The university asked students if they had a good computer, and they gave money to students who didn't have the money to buy computers, or 4G keys to the students who didn't have a good connection. So this was way inside the university to bridge the digital divide, to go, because we were going to teach just also digitally. So it didn't bridge. And also people, there are also people who cannot use computers. They are not digitally literate. They do not have the digital literacy, so you have to ask that. There are municipalities like Barcelona or Bogota who devised programs just to learn, or to also to do that. But well, it's we are not yet in the global village of McLuhan.
As I said before, if you you allowed me to compliment. I was optimistic because I was talking about an elite. We are an elite that we have connected, and poor people are not. And also teaching is very difficult because we have poor students that are not well connected. And also, I have been noticing that it's very difficult to concentrate. I think the individualism that you said before make students not being concentrated in we have to repeat 45 times what we said because the connection has failed, the student wasn't very concentrated, there are a cat passing by, they have to make their lunch. So it's very difficult to teach in this isolated and remote way that we are doing. And also the exclusion of the not connected population is making another kind of misery mass that we don't know what will happen. In the street of Sao Paulo, we see mostly men living in the streets. So there is a misery that is increasing. Misery, not individualism. Misery of poor, more than poor. They are miserable in the street, and we don't know what will happen if they want to explode the city, as we have in Cracolândia. And I don't know if you know the crack space of Bairro da Luz in Sao Paulo City. We have a segregation, Vinicius, of addicted people. And sometimes they explode and they go to the other streets. And I don't know how to answer your question. Are very complex, Christian. Sorry.
Vinicius and Paula, do you want to?
Christian, I only would like to say that when you talk about COVID, individualism, we have different realities in Brazil. Like in the shanty towns, the sense of community is very strong. As Vinicius told, it works very well. People are outdoors. I have developed a research, and I have been talking to people from Aglomerado Barragem Santa Lúcia all Fridays. It's 1 hour interview. And I have had the opportunity to know highly interesting teachers, priests, artists, all kinds of people. And they, according with their descriptions, people are outdoors. Their houses are not good enough for them to stay inside. It's too many people to be indoors. So they are outside. The children there are used to play in the streets. The neighbors look at the children. So all of them, when I ask, what do you most like in Aglomerado? The answer is the same, the sense of community. So when you talk about the impact of the COVID, individualism, I only do like to say that we have different realities. And another thing that I don't know the answer. You mentioned about the digital divide. And as a teacher, I see that it's some students, they have problems in accessing the internet and so on. But yesterday, I accessed an article published about the use of mobile phone in Brazil. And they told that all classes today have a mobile phone. The number of women that have mobile phone is larger than the number of men. So people from different classes, different ages, different gender. So today, in Brazil, the large majority of people has access to mobile phone, and is, as I interview these people from the agglomerate, they cannot go there now, none of them had problems saying, oh, I cannot talk to you because I don't have internet. So it's always one friend indicating another one. It's a snowball sampling, but it doesn't seem to be a problem, as it used some times ago. At least I'm talking about mobile phone and the opportunity to interact.
Okay, that's quite interesting. That's such an interesting work. I would love to learn more about it, Paula. Really, really interesting. So about this inference that Christian stimulated us to think, this inference on behavioral changes in terms of individualistic behaviors and so on. Of course, as Nadia said, that's a quite difficult question. I do think we have short-term changes. I think, of course, short-term changes are likely to of course, they can be felt. People, for instance, right now, people are anxious. People are facing anxieties, and so a number of mental health issues we are likely to deal with in the short term. I think once the pandemic is over, and this is already starting to happen in a few places around the world, very few places, I think people will. I think behavioral codes, social codes, are quite persistent. I think they are with us for hundreds or probably thousands of years. They led us to build cities. They led us to build communities. These systems, urban systems, help us to cooperate, help us to live together and live by ourselves in better ways. So I think we probably in the long term, I think we will resume our previous social behavioral, codes. That's certainly what happened in the previous pandemic, which was much bigger in terms of numbers of affected people, cases and deaths, as I mentioned earlier as well. So we've forgot about those socially extraordinary times that people faced. They also lived with masks and distancing and all these measures we are taking. None of these measures are new, by the way. So I think we went back to previous behavioral codes, and I think we are likely to do the same again. Some changes are more likely to happen in the economy, as we mentioned, and in education, as Nadia implied, especially for informational sectors and education, as I just said. But I think cities will remain central to our lives, our social lives, and how we engage in practices of cooperation, even though some of our activities will be performed in hybrid arrangements in terms of both presential and online activities. So, to sum it up, I don't think this will affect individualistic behavior more than the ongoing trend is already affecting, this trend already detected by Max Weber and others. So that's my view. Of course, this is an open question.
Okay. So I will stop with my difficult questions, and because the time is going on, and there are about 10 minutes left. So, well, as some sort of conclusion, I will ask each of you to say 2 or 3 words about, well, this time the vertical part of the what are the 2 or 3 concluding words about the future of residential verticality, at least in the cities you have worked on? In 2 or 3 words. Nadia first, perhaps. You have to unmute, please.
I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I have 3 comments, last comments. The first one is based on François Cher that I have traduced in his books, The New Principles of Urbanism. And he said to us, we urban planners and urbanists, we have to deal with 2 temporalities. One, of the new transformation of the APP, the technological transformation that are very, very rapid, and the inertia and temporality of the built environment. So the whole debate of this morning have to deal with this issue of the double temporality that we have to face of the transformation of the built environment, even though post-coronavirus, and the big surprise of this pandemic caused in the whole world. This is my first comment. The second one is about the Vinicius research that I've been I'm comparing. He worked in many seminars with us, and it's very important to my students, and they love Vinicius and his research. But I think I have another look of my research. I don't think it's only the distance between the buildings that cause segregation and uncomfortability of pedestrian lives. I think the urban rules, as I tried to say, the economic interests and the pre-capitalistic interests that landowners had, and also the car industry had in formulation of the urban regulation. In 1957, we have the spread and the cut of the FER in the city of Sao Paulo and spread the city. Differently that Rio and Copacabana and Rio, I love the city of Rio. I think it's another problem that we faced in Sao Paulo. We are not against the vertical growth, but the verticalization, as Vinicius make the difference of the 2 concepts, the verticalization and the form that the verticalization has assumed along his history of the urbanization of Sao Paulo make the problem. I think that's what I tried to show you in the my first explanation. And the third comment is to thank so much Manuel and Christian to be with you, with Vinicius and Paula in this wonderful morning and very interesting for reflection. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Paula.
Thank you, Christian. About the future of high-rise buildings, I think we have the development of compact cities. I think it's the goal, the achievement of compact cities should be pursued. But for me, the type of high-rise buildings that have been built are not sustainable. They do not they do not tend to enhance our health, our social, physical, and mental well-being. So, as an architect and town planner, I think we have to be able to achieve high density, we have to have a larger number of people in a small area, but without building the buildings as we are used to. if I would have to mention some physical attributes that seems that would have to change, I think I would maybe start with one that Vinicius mentioned, is that the height of the buildings and the distance between them. Another thing that I think you should be very careful is about the collective spaces, like the corridors, the halls. These are the spaces where people who live in these types of buildings meet each other. They are not inviting. They are not a space to be and spend time. So I think that all collective spaces should function, should be read as a kind of structure, because we cannot change them. They belong to the building. To do any change, it's much harder than to change the interior of an apartment. So would be, I think, that the mass and volume of the building, the collective spaces, like corridors and halls, also, of course, the ground floor level, and that should provide a strong interaction with the exterior. So you have to provide it to intervisibility, human scale details, and so on. So in short words, I really think that we need to develop a different typology. The typology that we are seeing, it's not working. We need a new design. And I also want to thank you very much, Manuel, Christian, Vinicius, Nadia. It was a pleasure. And I hope we will keep meeting and carry on with the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now you have to go to your drawing board just to devise the new one. Vinicius?
Right. That's, of course, all of you, and Christian included, have been bringing really interesting and tough questions. And so in terms, I would just add a couple of comments here. The first one is about research. I think we need to keep gathering evidences. We need to keep gathering evidences about the performances of different buildings, of different build form patterns, different morphologies, on a very multidimensional sense, looking into the social, microeconomic, health, energy consumption, and so on. And I mean, all these different levels you have to. So I think that's what is happening in the field. I think in the last 20 years, we've been moving into more systematic and systemic studies on these issues. And I think with a remarkable convergence in terms of findings. I mean, of course, we would benefit from more studies in this sense, but the ones that I've been in contact with concerning energy, health, as Paula mentioned so many times, and social effects and microeconomic effects, there seems to be a remarkable convergence in terms of a performance of traditional morphologies, better performance, better than more recent typologies in terms of isolated vertical architecture, which emerged in the last century or so. It seems like this kind of knowledge that we as a culture, as urban cultures developed throughout the centuries, we managed to find and choose along the way architectural types which are simply better in terms of performance in all those dimensions. This is a kind of an early claim here. This claim needs support, all right? But from these works on these different levels, that's what I've been gathering so far. So we have to learn from these studies, okay? And keep working to gather better evidence and to bring this evidence to the public sphere and to the real estate market and these agencies, because market forces are of course powerful. regarding cities and transformation and trends. Market forces are powerful, and they draw on they are likely to draw on simplistic views of what people want or what people think they want. The market forces deal with cliches like lifestyles, taste, prejudice, right? But people have deeper, unconscious thoughts and will and behaviors, which I mean, as researchers, I think we have to unearth, we have to uncover and identify the deeper connections between the built environment and people's behavior and collective behavior, of course, in terms of what characteristics and aspects of built environments support our cooperation and lives and happiness and well-being and health and so on. So I think the current trend, I don't see it in an optimistic way. I think market forces have been driven by the wrong reasons and by the wrong ideas and cliches. But I think it's up to us to change this in terms of our role as scientists, as researchers, just as we have a huge challenge in terms of global warming, and we have a huge challenge in terms of the role of cities in that larger trend. But I think we have these trends are connected, and I think in the next couple of decades we have a lot of work, and they will be crucial for changing these current negative trends we've been observing.
Thank you very much. And so this will be the closing remarks. So we have all to take, as we say in French, notre bâton de pèlerin, our pilgrim's stick, just to go and try and reach, well, not Jerusalem, but a better word. So thank you really, really very much, all of you. And well, I am, as Manuel wrote, encerrar a Sao. So closing the session now. And really thank you very much, and bye. So you can close the live.